Hi, I'm Maggie,
Hi, I'm Grace, and this is
a very bookish podcast.
Hey guys, welcome back to a Very Bookish podcast. Today is episode 87, and I have another author guest with me. I've had a couple author guests the last few weeks, and I'm going to have a couple more the next few weeks, but I'm excited to have Jewel E. Ann on. Not Julianne, Jewel E. Ann. I definitely got that confused before, but we have her on as, I guess, my co-host today. We're going to talk about her. We're going to talk about her new release, and we'll talk about whatever I come up with my ADHD brain. So welcome, Jewel.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yes, of course. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself for some of our listeners who don't know who you are and want to get interested in reading about you and learning about you and reading your books that you've written?
Yeah, so I've written 31 books. I write all over the romance genre. So I write contemporary romance, I write romantic comedy, suspense. I put out some women's fiction books, and I'm always up for a good challenge. It's crazy. I don't even know how long I've been writing, like over 10 years that I've been writing. It's crazy. Most people know the exact date. I don't know at this point in my life. I was a dental hygienist by trade for over a decade. I have 3 boys and a husband. I live here in Iowa. And I call writing my midlife crisis that I had. I don't know if it truly was, but it was a pretty good one. And now it's something that I can't imagine not writing. So it's a great job, but I love doing it. And I hope I can continue to find some new areas to break into. I love a good challenge. Someday I said that I will write, some vampires or something like that. And yeah, I would say probably books that maybe readers have heard of from me. Some of my better selling books have been Look the Part, the Transcend Duet, Transcend an Epic, the Naked Fisherman series. It's a duet as well. Those are probably ones that people for sure have heard of. I recently put out Before Us, was actually leaning a little bit towards women's fiction, but it was really well received in the romance community. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
That's great. Since this is the first question that popped into mind, since you said you've basically written a different tons of genres, if you had to choose one genre, this is kind of trivia, but I just have to think about it. If you had to choose one genre that you could write, only had to write for the rest of your life, what would it be? Women's fiction, contemporary romance, rom-coms? Like, what's the one genre of romance that you could be like, I could be solid for the rest of my life with this category?
Yeah, it's a great question because I've had this discussion with people recently. It would be probably women's fiction, but it would be still romance is kind of under the umbrella of women's fiction. But I think I would write more stories that had a very strong romance element to it, but in some cases it might feel a little secondary to the story. The couple, like I said, Before Us would fall into that a little bit. My book For Lucy would fall into those areas. And it's just because it's challenging for me where I'm writing more about the human condition and I'm able to tackle a big range of topics, that it's not just a simple formula of, okay, I'm going to write just this romance. What's going to be the meet cute? What's going to break them up? How am I going to get them back together? But with women's fiction, there's these bigger outside forces that play a role in the story. And for me, it's more fulfilling to write those stories. It's more challenging to write those stories. And I always talk about writing for me as a form of therapy. So it's probably more therapeutic to really be able to bring in a lot of life circumstances. And sometimes those are a little bit heavier subject matter, but that I could write forever, but it would still have the romance element. It wouldn't be something, I need the romance, even if I'm like watching a movie that's like my husband watching his guns and violence and all this. I'm like, I hope there's a romance in it too. Just need like a little bit of romance in there for sure.
Yeah, I didn't realize when I was like starting out to figure out that I had a love of romance, I didn't realize that that's what I was always looking for in books, like in fantasy books or like in TV shows. I was always looking for the romance. I'm like, I'm ready to see this romance. I love shipping this couple. And then I'm like, like, fuck, why don't I just read books about romance? Which I think blew my mind. I was like, wait, there's books just about romance and smut, and I can enjoy that? Oh my gosh. So were you an avid like romance reader before you became like an author? Where what's kind of like the journey of reading romance and then becoming a romance author? What was kind of your journey to do that?
Yeah, I have always loved romance. Not necessarily always reading, but probably movies that I've watched I've gravitated towards that. Kind of like you unknowingly sometimes like, why am I drawn to certain movies? I'm like, I'm a romance junkie, but yeah, I didn't really realize it till later. I mean, I was like for me, more of an original romantic where I was reading some romance novels, more like even Nicholas Sparks type novels that weren't explicit romance, but it still had this like, oh, this romance story. And I think that's what's exciting now. If you want a little more spice, you can still tell this really epic romance story and have that. But like my journey into writing romance that is smuttier, a little more explicit, and mine's not. I don't write erotica, and I don't write super smutty romance, but there's explicit scenes in my books. But I mean, I was probably somebody who got on board with like a lot of people, the 50 Shades of Grey of like, oh, are people like, or Sylvia Day, are people reading this? And I know there were people writing it way before then, but I think it was more of a popularity thing of somebody like me who was going to the library. I didn't know what a book blog was when I started writing. I hadn't read a digital book when I started writing. I had gone to the library or Barnes and Noble. I always had physical copies. So it's so cool to see like that's more of an in thing, having these physical copies again. But yeah, I wasn't the person who like, I wasn't in high school just consuming massive amounts of romance books or anything. In high school, I was very active in like sports and other things. And I've always liked writing. That's always been a strong suit for me, but it always just seemed more like, I was kind of good at it, but can I really make a living? No. So I went in a different direction. But yeah, I don't have a fantastic story of I've consumed thousands of romance novels over the years. I've lived a lot of years. That's my experience.
I mean, when you say that you don't particularly write smutty books, I mean, for me, that probably might be true, but I feel like some people who do read those books that are kind of lighter on the spice, but they still have those more intimate scenes are like, oh, scandal. Like, I feel like that was me when I first started reading. I was like, I think I was reading like J.R. Ward was like my first, like, or Kennedy Fox was like my first dive. I feel like Kennedy Fox was like, I was straight down the rabbit hole, but at least J.R. Ward, it's more of that big publisher. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is scandalous. I was like, oh my gosh, there's books who write like this. And now I'm like, that's bottom for me when it comes to like the smut scale. So I definitely think it's very interesting the levels of spice that you could be somebody's like the spiciest author they read could be you. What do you think about that? Of like people could think of you as their spiciest quote unquote author.
Yeah, I mean, and definitely probably for me having read Nicholas Sparks books, or I was reading books that weren't romance but maybe had romance elements but never any type explicit. I can see how reading my books, because when I first started writing, I had more of that in my books, and my husband would like recommend my books to like some of his customers. I'm like, oh, we have to let them know there's explicit language and explicit sex scenes. And that has, I still write that in my books, but I don't write it as much. And I think like you were talking about, like there's this whole spicy scale. So if you go into like TikTok or something like that, and you see like the little red peppers, I mean, I would have like, when I started writing, I would have been like, I'm writing 5 red peppers. I am writing like solid smut. And now it's interesting because I see even some of my earlier books that have more explicit scenes in them. They're like, people, even though they might love the book, they're like, oh, it's 2 peppers. And I'm like, wow, and I said this I did a vlog or YouTube video a while back. I'm like, what is 5? I mean, is it a pop-up book? Is it like a scratch and sniff book? Like what level of craziness is 5? If what I think my most explicit books are only rank is the 2. So yeah, it's all in where you come from. I realize that, and I don't, and even like what I was telling you about my husband, like recommending my books to customers. He's like, early on, it was good if somebody's like, oh, well, I've read 50 Shades of Grey. And he's like, oh, you can read my wife's books then. But he's like, but I didn't know if they only had the Bible laying on a coffee table. I was like, do I say anything to them about it? But interesting thing, I've told the story a lot. It's not a long story, but I found out about the book 50 Shades of Grey from my best friend, who found out about it from her friend in their church group. So she's like, hey, one of the girls in my Bible group or whatever told me about this trilogy. And so then I was reading it and I'm like, Bible group? And, I'm like flipping through the pages and I'm like, interesting. I clearly haven't been to church in a while. Have things changed?
That I think is, I never heard of anybody say that they learned of 50 Shades of Grey through a Bible.
Yes. I mean, I know they weren't talking about that book, but just that another person in that group. And so imagine my surprise reading 50 Shades and going, really, your Bible study group? And she also recommended the group, prefacing it with, please don't judge me, which I've known her since I was 8 years old. I'm like, I've been judging you for years. It's fine.
I mean, that's great. Yeah, I used to work at Barnes and Noble, and I did a spicy rack. And I think I put like 50 Shades of Grey, like one or two spices. And then my manager was like, no, 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 no. And I was like, if you want to get in the youths now, the youths are thinking 50 Shades of Grey is like 1 to 2 spices now. Cause I kind of mentioned this before we started the podcast. So if you're listening to the podcast, you probably have already watched it, but Eamon's Books and I are doing a live about Haunting Adeline by H.D. Carlton, which is a dark romance, stalker romance. And this is the like spiciest book I think I've ever read, where it's like, I'm like, oh, okay, it's questioning my sanity. Like, that's how, like, it's kind of like a pop-up book, like, like the scared, like it scares me a little bit. I'm like, okay, I need to close it, like a Jack in the Box kind of thing. But yeah, I love seeing people's different levels of spice, because I don't know, I just am a little bit more diluted, I feel like, because I've read so much that I'm like, oh yeah, that's like 1 or 2. And then I've had like girls who are like, it's a 2 for you? That's like a 10 on my level. And they're like, I thought like Nicholas Sparks was like a 3. And I was like, oh girly, you haven't experienced it yet. But yeah, that's very interesting. Do you want to tell the listeners who are listening right now about your new up and coming book? Because you do have a release. Today is today is March, but this is releasing April 1st. So do you want to tell them about your newest release a little bit?
Yeah, so it's releasing this week then, April 6th, and it is called If This Is Love. It is a standalone. It is age gap, forbidden love. It's a cowboy romance. So for people who follow the tropes, this will be my first cowboy romance. It's set in Texas. And for those readers who have read my Fisherman series, it is a age gap, forbidden love. So I call If This Is Love a cross between Yellowstone, for those who are fans of Yellowstone, and the Fisherman series, because there's definitely the forbidden element, the age gap element, but the characters are awful. I mean, the 2 main characters are amazing, but like for those who've watched Yellowstone, for me, I watch it, I'm like, all of these people are awful. Why am I so addicted to them? Why do I love this show? But it's just like they're corrupt and so there's that part of this book. And it's a story of basically elevator pitches. What if the guy that you loved was being forced to marry the woman you hate most in the world? And so it's there's angst, there's just some grit to the story. When you write characters and you allow them to be awful, there's just that extra. It's not like dark romance, it's angsty.
It's angsty.
it's angsty, and it's heartbreaking the times that it's angsty, because it's not like the story's about a bunch of misunderstandings. This is just about like life circumstances and people being blackmailed and things that you can't control. And even reading back through the book here most recently, I'm surprised at the scenes that I'm like, my heart breaks at the exact same scenes over and over again. And so I'm so excited to see how readers, receive this, if their hearts are breaking where mine are breaking, and if they're hating the characters that they should hate the way I hated them when I write them. It's a love-hate relationship. I love writing villains, so that's why it's a love-hate relationship with me.
I mean, I'm looking at the cover right now and it is beautiful, gorgeous. I'm from Texas and I don't like dating cowboys in real life, but if I can fictionally date a cowboy, you bet your ass I'm going to do it. I feel like fictional cowboys are way better than the ones in real life. And all you had to tell me was Yellowstone. That's all you had to say. You have me sold. Grace and I are both Yellowstone fans, and Rip is like our daddy. We pray to him every night because that man is something else. We love Yellowstone and we love good villains too. I feel like villains are, I feel the kind of vibe that you're giving me from it, like it's gritty and angsty. I'm like, oh, maybe it's a good like thing to read after I read my very dark romance book. I'll be like, oh, Yellowstone inspired book. Let me just read that about cowboys because I love me some cowboys. Those are really good.
Yeah, it's funny. I didn't think when I watched Yellowstone, I wasn't like, oh, this is going to be my kind of show. I'm like, oh, am I going to like this? And then it was so addictive. And the whole time I was watching it, I was thinking, I need to write a cowboy. And I want to it inspired me. I like the idea of this awful family, like you're rooting for the family on some things, but other times you're like, they're ruthless and incredibly mean. And so yeah, I do think people who like Yellowstone will like this book. I think people who don't like Yellowstone will like this book because it's not overly like heavy on the rancher part of this. They live on a ranch, but it's not like pages and pages of letting you know what they do all day on the ranch. There's the story part of it there. So you don't have to love cowboy stories to love this one.
Yeah. Yellowstone, it goes against everything about me. I'm like, literally, they're like destroying this like place and they don't give a rat's ass about anybody else. They're like, I will do anything to protect this ranch. And they're like, I got this political position because I'm going to protect us in this ranch. And I'm just like, and it's like the craziest things they do. I think it was, for those who haven't watched Yellowstone season 1, spoiler alert, but when Beth goes into the shop and just destroys everything, and I'm just like, yes, like, go girl, get it. And then I'm like, she probably just committed like a ton of crimes. Like, I'm like,
yeah.
Hey, no.
Probably for like my generation watching it, we looked at it of like a similar scene in Pretty Woman years ago of like the uppity shop in Beverly Hills, but this was like that, but on steroids, because Beth is like way worse than any character on there. That's actually one of my favorite scenes from. We're not going to talk about books. We'll just talk about Yellowstone. That's one of my favorite scenes, and I think that for me, I channeled that to write a scene that's in my book that is it's not that scene or anything like it, but just when somebody's hit their limit and they're gonna go off. And it is actually one of the favorite scenes that I wrote, because I'm like, I'm going to let this character just go off on this other character. And it was so satisfying at the end of it, even though it was kind of a heartbreaking scene. It was so satisfying when you see one character stand up for themselves or for what's right, even if they do it in a weird, awful way, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, that scene, I will see like edits on TikTok about it, and I'm like, oh, maybe I should rewatch. And I'm like, or
Yeah.
sometimes I go and just rewatch that scene because they'll post it on TikTok, like the full scene. And I'm like, perfect. I could just rewatch it here. And it still like hits me in my heart where I'm like, oh, Beth is such a badass woman. And I'm just like, she's done so many illegal things in this show. And she's the one character that I will always root for. And I'm like, yes, I will ride or die for Beth and Rip. And it's just so funny. And I think that's like my favorite scene out of the whole entire series is that scene where I'm just like, it was so good that they just like couldn't top that scene for any of her other scene. I feel like some of them possibly were almost as good, but that one was just like, you got to see the real Beth and how like, it was kind of that gritty kind of like, oof, she actually is really fucking scary.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, no, I could talk about Yellowstone all day. It's something that I completely enjoy, and Cowboys too, but fictional ones. For those, I grew up in Texas. I'm done with that. I'm done with the cowboy life, the cowboy boots and everything. I've gotten all those given away. I'm done. I'm done with that for now in my life. So, kind of looking forward in your career is we kind of mentioned it before the podcast started. Is there any genre that like you want to challenge yourself that specific, like maybe like suspense romance or supernatural romance that you like, I want to try this and just see how it goes kind of thing?
Yeah. So when I wrote my Transcenduet, it's Transcendent Epic, and it has an element that for some people would be stepping into the paranormal. And I liked it. And I've done that with my life series. My life series are 2 different duets, and they revolve around near-death experiences. And I got a taste of how fun it can be when the rules don't apply. When you write contemporary romance, you have to like stay within the rules of reality. And it is really amazing to step out of the box and write things that you get to make up your own rules. And it hit me when I was writing those stories. Like, I know why so many people enjoy writing fantasy romance or paranormal romance, because you get to make the rules. I mean, we're always making our own worlds, even in contemporary romance. To some degree, you're making your own world. And in some of my books, even write fictional towns and stuff, but I'm still within the realm of reality. But writing like the life series and writing that Transcenduet was so fun. But I was just like barely stepping out of contemporary romance. I was still pretty grounded in there. I think I was testing the waters, like, how will my readers handle this? And like the Transcend was easy. I mean, loved it. Most people like the life series, but for some people it was too dark. Honestly, it was just, they didn't want to go to, and it's not even like an HD Carlton dark or anything. It was just darker than what I write. So yeah, I threaten, because my mom doesn't want me to write anything other than more like contemporary, but I threatened to write those vampire romances. Like my Jack and Jill series, I've thought about writing another spinoff, and I'm like, and the dead people come back as vampires and werewolves. And my mom's like, no, but like part of me wants to do it, and I will do it, just because I'm at the point where why not? Like, I know I can pump out these romance books and feed that audience, but why not go ahead and put out something that's more paranormal or fantasy? It's like when we were talking about how I enjoy writing women's fiction, and I put out a few books that borderline women's fiction. It's like testing the waters with your audience. Like, will you go there with me? And most of my readers go there with me, and I'm so lucky. I have some readers that are like, nope, you drew this line that I will not cross, and that's fine, but I would never let that hold me back. So we'll see. I've had so many people that have been like, yes, if you write about vampires, I will read it. So I'm like, I should just do it. Why not?
I mean, in this time right now for indie authors, it's like you can literally put out anything and somebody will like it. I feel like it's the power of social media and book talk and bookstagram at the moment. It's like even if you have like a built up audience, you can have a whole nother audience with a different series. and different genres. I definitely have noticed that, particularly with authors. But I did want to ask you, since you have so many books, how fast is it? How fast are you with writing a book? Is it like a 6 month process? Is it usually a year? Like, how long is your process for writing a book?
That really depends on the book and what I have going on in my life. Writing is my full-time job, but I don't do it full-time, if that makes sense. So yes, it is my profession. It pays the bills, puts food on the table. I don't have a paid job outside of this, but I have 3 children, 2 are grown. My youngest, though, he has dyslexia, so he does online schooling and I have to assist him with that. If I can just sit and if I can write and I don't have to have these other things going on, I can write a 90 to 100,000 word romance book in probably 3 months. That's just writing it. Like I'm writing it. That's not editing it. That's not beta reading it. That's not overly tweaking it. But yeah, I could do that in 3 months. Do I like that type of schedule of release? Absolutely not. If I had a dream schedule, I would write 1 book a year. If I had a dream schedule, like knowing that I wasn't going to lose my readership, that it was enough to keep the income that I need, I would write 1 book a year. That would be my dream, simply because I would like to write books that have more depth to them, like along the lines of the romance that's heavier in women's fiction. But a lot of times those topics take way more research. And that's where right now, when you're pumping out books like 3 books a year, 4 books a year for some authors, you don't have the time to do justice to the research that needs to be done for certain stories, or you just have to put out stories that no research is required, but it starts to feel very formulaic to me, like you're just, oh, it's an office romance, there's no research needed in it. But my dream is that 1 book a year. So I know that's not what my readers want to hear, but that would feed my soul and it would be the most amazing book every year. I would guarantee that. But yeah,
Your readers right now.
What's that?
I was going to say your readers right now are like internally screaming at you and like punching their screens. They're like, don't even say that right now. It's like illegal for you to say that.
They're so spoiled this year because Before Us that I put out this year, my first book out this year, it was actually written several years ago. And I'm putting out If This Is Love. And then I'm going to be turning 2 novellas that I wrote for like anthologies and newsletter building. I'm turning both of those into full-length novels, plus putting out another book. So it's not like I'm writing fast, but because of what I'm putting out this year, my assistant and I were like looking at the schedule and we're like, am I going to be putting out 4, 5 books this year? And again, it's not that I'm writing them and putting them out right away. So in 2024, that might be my 1 book year. I don't know.
I mean, I feel like with the power of social media now, since you have such a huge back catalog, promoting your other books at the moment and letting you like do like a 1 book a year can also be, I think, is a doable thing to do. And I mean, I don't have 30 plus books that I've written. It's 30 plus, correct? 31, you said? Yes, 31. I was right. I was like, it's over 30. I was like, wait, is it over 30 or over 50? I don't know. But for 4 books in a year, holy freaking cow. Like I can't even write like a full essay in 1 day. I don't know how you're able to write 4. I guess you said 2 of them are novellas that then you're going to turn in, and 1 of them you had them, but you're still putting them out in a year. That's a lot. And so what kind of is your process? Do you like plot a book and then write it, or are you more of like you just write it out, then edit it, and then you're kind of like, okay, I'll kind of see where it goes. What is kind of your process and your writing style for creating a book?
Yeah. So I don't outline anything. I don't give a lot of thought to like scenes ahead in a book. I don't always know how a book's going to end. I start with a concept. Sometimes I know what maybe a plot twist is going to be. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I'm just I can be inspired by listening to a song and just decide I'm going to sit down and start writing this thing in my head. I feel like the times that I've tried to be more organized and write out like in-depth details on my characters, so I know everything about my characters before I start the book, or I try to plot something and it's a nightmare because for me it's creatively stifling, and I feel like I'm writing in this box, and I don't like doing that. So I don't, and I let that be okay. I just sit down and write, and sometimes oftentimes I will stop. I will feel like I'm getting a little bit lost in the book, sometimes lost in a scene, lost in just one character's head. And so I'll go back and reread the book, and sometimes I'll tweak things, but I don't pull a lot from books. I don't usually delete lots of chapters. Like I'm not somebody who usually has a lot of like bonus content at the end of my book. Like some authors will put bonus content on a website or in a newsletter, like deleted scenes. I don't have a lot of those. But yeah, I just sit down and write the book. When I first started writing, I would share it with beta readers a little bit at a time. I don't do that anymore. I just write the story and then it goes through beta readers. I don't have a ton of beta readers. Then it goes through editing, and I do have a lot of people on my editing team. But that's it for me. And it is so gratifying to me when I read different things about famous authors, Stephen King, I'm trying to think who I was reading the other day, was talking about how they don't plot either. They just like sit down and write, and they just let these characters, I think it was Jodi Picoult, and she does a lot of research with her books, but she doesn't try to get too in depth with like outlines and things because she wants the readers to speak to her. And I love that because I'm like, okay, I'm not the only one out there talking about voices in my head.
Yeah, I've definitely been working on a couple work in progress, and I feel like I also have that where I feel like the character sometimes talking to me, and I like imagine it in like a movie in my head. That's how I imagine when I read a book. It's like a movie playing in my head. And it's so interesting because I'll like talk to the character and I'm like, "How are you today?" And they're like, "Bitch, fuck off." And I'm like, "Okay." And it's like the characters and the voices, and I like will start writing and I'm like, "How would this character react?" But like, I don't even think about that. I like play the scene in my head and I'm like, I'm trying to write it. And I'm like, this doesn't sound good, but I definitely am trying to write. I will say that, but it's a slow process. I'm going to graduate first and then I'll kick it into high gear.
One step at a time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the worst thing that a writer can do, honestly, is overthink sometimes the process, and to not respect their natural creativity, and to just sometimes just sit down and write. It's like, so you don't always have to go to an aerobics class or a Pilates class and take some class to exercise. Like just move your body, just like do something that comes naturally to you. And to me, if writing truly is your art, you should just be able to sit down and write. And you don't have to focus on, am I being in an active versus passive voice all the time? You don't have to like over stress on that, but sit down and tell the story, because there can be great stories that maybe are poorly edited or would not get an A+ in a college creative writing class, but they're fantastic stories because somebody just has a gift for telling the story. And for me, I'm like, I don't have like tropes that I won't read. I don't have triggers. I don't have all of this. I just want somebody to tell me a good story. And I think most readers are actually that way. They just want to be told a good story.
That kind of goes into my like question that I had, but like my last question that I ask every author is, if you could give like a short 1 to 2 sentence piece of advice to new authors or to somebody who's thinking about writing and starting to write, what is the one piece of advice you would give them?
Yeah, it's along that lines. It's, for me, I always say to honor your authentic voice. You don't need to write like a Julianne. You don't need to write like a Colleen Hoover. You don't need to write like whoever that you think is successful. And I think writers get it into their head, oh, this went viral on TikTok, therefore that's how I should write, or a bunch of readers are talking about this, so therefore I should write that way. You need to find your own authentic voice and honor that, and you will protect you will perfect your craft as you go. I'm still I can't talk perfecting my craft. I hope I always am perfecting my craft, but my voice hasn't changed. I've written 31 books, and my voice is my voice in all of those books. And authors need to find their voice and honor that, and block out the noise of I need to be, oh, this person's successful, so I need to write like them. No, you need to write like you. That is your art, your voice. Be authentic that way.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love that. And I hope our listeners, I hope you enjoy this episode and that you take that into mind, because I will be taking that into mind after I graduate. I'll take that into mind. I'll rewatch this episode after I graduate and then be like, okay, Maggie, get your butt going and go just to a coffee shop and just start writing. But thank you, everybody who has listened. Jewel, do you want to kind of shout out all your social media links and where they can find If This Is Love and where they can pre-order it and everything like that?
Yeah, probably the best place to find me kind of everywhere is to go to my website, which is just juleeann.com, and you can get links to all my social media sites, Instagram, YouTube, all of that. I do have a Facebook group called Jules Jonesies. I have an email that you can get from my website. My website's the best place to just find everything, including pre-order for If This Is Love. It will go into Kindle Unlimited, but you can still pre-order it. The audio is, as we do this, the audio is available now in the paper book. I do believe, if I'm saying this correctly as we're recording it, it's probably available now. All of it on my website.
I know. I'm actually looking on her website right now, and I'm gonna just add it to my cart and just ready for it to come to me when it. Because all you had to say to me was Yellowstone, and I was sold. That's all you had to do for me. Well, thank you to our listeners, and I will have all of Jewel's links down below. So if you are interested in reading her books or going to her website, it will be linked directly down below. So you can go ahead and just click on over there and check it out. And so I will see you guys in 2 weeks. Have a good rest of your day, guys. Bye.
Thank you.